Hello, game devs. In this video, we're going to talk about how to critique. So critique means giving feedback. Sometimes this means giving feedback to video games that have already been out. Sometimes this means giving feedback to games that are in process. We're going to talk about both of those. And any additional things that we need to know about what we have to do to give something in progress. So the typical questions you want to ask yourself in order to create some feedback, to create some thought. What was the first impression you had of the game? Does anything stand out, like gameplay wise or otherwise? What do you think about the core pillars of gameplay are? Which mechanics are working towards those pillars? There's a great game called Earth Defense Force 2020, and in this game, we have a giant bug-like ants, like kind of like a B movie from the black and white, or something you might see on Mystery Science Theater 3000, with like giant bugs as evil creatures that were superimposed with film. So this game is like that in the way that the game is over the top. It really strikes a chord and reminds me of that kind of B movie kind of feel, because they use regular creatures and then they just kind of make them gigantic, and they spent a lot of time creating destructible environments that would have a really fun place to move around and fight these giant bugs that were coming through. So it really was fun and chaotic. That was kind of my first impression. Yeah, it really struck that aesthetic that they were trying to go for. What does this game mean? Does the game represent something to you? So, when we talk about art, what is art? So we say that games are art. So if they're art, which they are, what is it that they're saying? So every piece of art says something, either about the world we live in, about the artist's experience, or about some other aspect of the world that the artist is interested in. So you might also ask, is this game engaging? Does it catch your interest? Why or why not? Using evidence is really important with specific mechanical, or aesthetic concerns. How complete is the mechanic and aesthetic cohesion? So what I mean by mechanic and aesthetic cohesion, and I'm going to use this term a lot, is, do the things that you do make sense for what it looks like? So in other words, is the mechanic of what you're doing somehow supported by the visuals, so that we can more fully understand the experience that the designer is trying to get across? So if we're trying to get across loneliness, for instance, there's the game Alone, or the game Don't Starve. So a lot of those games, when we want to evoke loneliness, we will put a little circle around we'll put a little circle of light around the player, and then kind of darken the rest of the world. Even though we have the screen real estate, we could just zoom in and make the entire screen the sphere of light that you could see. Instead, we zoom out and make it very clear that the player is inside something and very far away from other things. So, there are ways that those kind of things can be evoked. So describe the game first if you're having trouble. Think about it like a game reviewer. They're talking about gameplay. That includes game feel, the controls and abilities that you can do. What can you do? Visuals. This is, art history is really helpful if you're going to talk about visuals. And a lot of the same critique that we apply to visuals, story, and music are, from those disciplines and are similar. But we want to understand the context of how those things interact with the gameplay specifically. So use of color, use of form and silhouette. I don't know if you know this, but Team Fortress 2 has a very strong silhouette for every single character. And their use of hats, that's one of the only things that you can really adjust the silhouette, but we can still really tell from the head down that which character is which. This was intentional, and it was to support gameplay, because gameplay wants in the gameplay need is you want to be able to identify what character is what class. So, and you need to be able to do that from far away, and you just have to be able to do it very quickly. Humans, our ability to see stuff is often silhouette first. So that's why when you see camouflage, it's breaking up the form of what we are used to. So, that's what we're thinking about for visuals. Story, music, was it a branching storyline? Was the music interactive? So for instance, in a lot of horror games, the music will create stingers or build. When I was working on Shrek 3, you could switch. It was like a three Dirty Dwarves 3-character switch game, Trine, if you played that. And you could switch between Shrek, the donkey, and Puss. So each character had its own track of music. Puss in Boots had like a guitar riff. Donkey had like kind of a trombone-y kind of thing. And I believe Shrek kind of had a piano. It's been a little bit. But we switched the music to make the game feel different from each of the characters' perspectives from music standpoint. So we kept like the bass track, but we just kind of switched the melodies on you when you switch between characters. So, and art, like I mentioned, art history is really important. This is Vasily Kandinsky. This is an artist that did a lot of impressionist and then later on some really abstract work. And I heard it straight from the designer Tetsuya Mizuguchi of Rez, and when he said that Kandinsky was a direct reference to the visuals and kind of surrealistic worlds and that he created in Rez, which later these are screenshots from Rez Infinite. And which is a VR game, which is even more immersive than the original, but it was a really strong connection. So being aware of all of the art in the world can really, really help you be able to make those connections. Interpretation. So after we describe what it is, we need to think about what it means. So how can I explain this game's meaning in one sentence? And can we provide evidence? How can we provide evidence to this argument? So Super Mario Brothers is a reflection of humans' relationship with time and our inability to control its passage. And, this is not the be-all, end-all interpretive critique. This is just a quick interpretation that I wrote together for all of us to work on. And so part of the interpretation process is also seeing holes in each other's interpretations or how it could maybe be perceived differently. But in Super Mario Brothers, there's this timer, right? Like the timer forces you to go forward and to the right. Otherwise, you quote unquote lose. So you can keep going level to level, just like birthday to birthday. You have to keep going. The wall that is on the left-hand side pushes you to the right. You can never go backwards. So even though we can't go backwards, just like we can't go backwards in time, we still have control over the things that we do in our personal day-to-day lives. Today we can do something, tomorrow we can do something. But the main overarching goal of Mario is to go save the princess, right? The princess is in another castle. This is a repeating cycle, something that we do all the time. Anytime you go, oh man, I really want to get from grade 10 to 11, 11 to 12, you get there and then you go, all right, what's next? What's the next thing I'm gonna do? Humans always need to take a next step after they get somewhere, we get bored and uninterested with what we have. It's one of humans. I think it's one of humanity's greatest assets, maybe. We'll see. But also, just by the way, this is just a side note. I don't know how to interpret this, but isn't it really weird that Toad is and the whole Mushroom Kingdom is totally fine with Mario and Luigi like eating mushrooms all the time? Isn't that somehow cannibalistic or weird? I mean, it's not. That's just a weird thing that I was thinking about. So what are your opinions on the game? So once you've thought about the game from a context, decide what do you want to talk about? What lens do you want to take this from? If you're familiar with writing history papers or English papers, this is, those lenses might help. A historical lens, a contextually, a cultural lens, for the day, considering the time Mario was innovative. And again, based on all of the things that you just thought about, what is the mechanic aesthetic cohesion? Did it get the point across that it was trying to get across, or that you thought it was trying to get across? How did you interpret the point of the game? And, games are very different for very different people. So here's the one thing that we really want to focus on. This is something, especially when we're working on in-process games, we need to use language that's constructive. And the best way to catch ourselves from not using constructive language, but also the best way to provide constructive language, is to say yes and, not no but. So what I mean by that is when we talk about things, we're blue skying a lot of times. We're just saying how it could go. And we want to add options and opportunities for our colleagues in class to think about maybe things they might not have thought about in ways they could take their project in a new direction or towards the direction that you feel that they were going for in the first place, depending on whether or not your opinion is jiving with the developers themselves. So what we want to say is, yeah, that would be great. It would be also great if we could get this feature, or this feature would really complement that feature, or this visual, or this kind of look. How do we build upon what is being presented? So the example we have is, hey, I have an idea. What if you're a slab of meat? And you're constantly flinging yourself into a grinder to trying to get past like wicked hard platforming, right? So the yes and approach is, yeah, it would be really cool if the character exploded into blood, or yeah, it would be cool if he like made bloody streaks crossing the ground when he walked. And then, someone in meetings also might say, no, that's a terrible idea. Or, you should look out. The ESRB is really cracking down on bloody games or something like that. Or, there's so many reasons not to do this because XYZ. So, some people are no but people, and that's fine. It's just kind of like your initial reaction. But if that is you, just take a moment to try to formulate a yes and feedback and response. So just, maybe check yourself before saying what you want to say, but work towards the yes and approach, because eventually, it is important. Like I was saying in the other videos, giving feedback is important, and giving honest feedback is important, and poking holes in each other's work is important. So making sure that people are aware of some of the things that might not go right. But at the same time, we want to try to phrase this in yes and kind of work. We want to work towards the goals of the developers. We don't want to impose our viewpoint, which may be right, may be wrong. Because sometimes this happens with me a lot when I go to a programmer. I always go ask my programmers for features, and I always say, hey, look, I don't know if this is a 1 minute fix or a 1 week fix, but I would love to see it if we could do this. And then, we talk about it. So, trying to always build upon stuff. All right. So that was, by the way, that's Super Meat Boy. If you've never played it, the game that I was just talking about, the really fun game, really, really wicked gameplay for really just like tight controls. There's plenty of critique online about this game. So go ahead and maybe take a look. And that's about all I have for game critique. I will see you in class.